The night they disowned me, my father tore my name out of the company records like I was never his daughter. I'm Ava Reynolds, the youngest child of the Reynolds dynasty, owners of Reynolds Industries, a billion-dollar real estate empire that built half the city skyline. For 23 years, I believed family meant trust. I believed hard work would earn me a place beside my father and my older brother, Ethan. I was wrong. Ethan was everything my father, Charles Reynolds, admired: bold, arrogant, ruthless. He wore expensive suits, closed million-dollar deals, and knew exactly how to say the right words in front of the cameras. I, on the other hand, was quiet. The strategist. The one who handled the company's toughest projects behind the scenes. But my ideas never had my name on them. Ethan made sure of that. When I discovered that Ethan had been laundering money through one of our overseas accounts, I thought I was doing the right thing by telling our father. I gathered the proof, the statements, the transfers, everything. I thought he would thank me for protecting the company. Instead, he called me a liar. Ethan stood there that night, pretending to be calm, his hands folded like a saint. "Dad, she's just jealous," he said smoothly. "She's been trying to undermine me for months." And father believed him. In front of the entire board, he called me a disgrace. Said I was no longer part of the family. Security escorted me out of the building I'd helped rebuild. I can still hear the boardroom doors slam behind me, the sound of my world collapsing. For weeks, I disappeared. Moved into a small apartment far away from the marble towers and glass offices I once called home. But even in exile, I couldn't forget. Every headline about Ethan made my blood boil. Every time I saw our company logo, it reminded me of the years I'd devoted, stolen by the people I loved most. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Because when I started digging deeper, I found something Ethan never wanted anyone to see: a secret deal that could destroy not only his career but the entire Reynolds empire. And that's when my plan began. They thought disowning me ended my story. But they underestimated how far I'd go when I have nothing left to lose. Because I'm not coming back for forgiveness. I'm coming back for everything. And this time, Ethan Reynolds won't see me coming. Should have seen it coming: the lies, the manipulation, the slow poisoning of trust. But back then, I still believed blood meant loyalty. Before the night they disowned me, the cracks had already begun to show. I remember one morning, sitting in the glass conference room at Reynolds Industries, going over the quarterly reports I'd prepared. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights fixing the numbers Ethan had accidentally inflated to impress our father. When I walked in, Ethan was already there, smiling, calm, confident. "Relax, Ava," he said smoothly, patting my shoulder. "You don't need to worry about the details. I've already presented the figures. The figures I created." When father entered, he looked straight at Ethan. "Brilliant work, son. These numbers are strong. You're really turning things around." And Ethan just nodded, pretending to be humble, never once mentioning my name. I forced a smile, my hands trembling under the table. The room applauded him. Me? I was invisible. That was the first time I felt something dark coil inside my chest: doubt. Then came the missed meetings. Files I never sent mysteriously appeared in Ethan's inbox. Projects I'd been assigned suddenly shifted to his department. When I tried to bring it up to father, he brushed me off. "You're imagining things, Ava. Your brother's just more assertive. Learn from him." But there was one thing I couldn't ignore: the late-night calls. Ethan's office light stayed on long after everyone had gone home. Sometimes I'd hear muffled voices through the walls. Once, I caught him locking a drawer full of unmarked envelopes. When I asked about it, he laughed. "Company gifts," he said. "You wouldn't understand." The more I tried to uncover what he was hiding, the more isolated I became. My coworkers stopped making eye contact. Emails went unanswered. Even my assistant, someone I trusted, started avoiding me. The silence was louder than any insult. One afternoon, while reviewing internal transfer logs, I noticed something strange. One of our foreign accounts had made a massive payment to an offshore company. The signature on the approval line was mine. Except, I never signed it. My stomach twisted. I knew Ethan had power, but forging my authorization? That was bold, even for him. I went to confront him, but when I reached his office, I froze. He was inside, talking quietly to our father. I heard my name. Then laughter. Cold, condescending laughter. I didn't go in. I just stood there, staring through the glass, realizing how easily they could destroy me with one lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying their voices, my father's trust, Ethan's deceit, and my growing fear that I was being erased one piece at a time. And deep down, I started to wonder, what if the betrayal had already begun? I'll never forget the day my world officially collapsed, the day I learned that betrayal doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in a smile. It was a Friday morning. The board meeting had been called unexpectedly, and every major executive was summoned. I remember walking into the gleaming conference room, clutching my files, my heart pounding with unease. Ethan sat at the head of the table beside our father, his silver watch glinting under the lights. He looked calm, too calm. The moment I sat down, Father's voice cut through the air. "Ava, we need to talk about your misconduct." My blood ran cold. "My what?" Ethan leaned forward, his expression perfectly rehearsed, sympathetic, wounded, fake. "I didn't want it to come to this, Ava. But the auditors found discrepancies, millions transferred through your login credentials." He slid a folder toward me. Inside were printed bank statements, forged emails, even my digital signature. Every page screamed guilt. It was all there, evidence that I'd embezzled money from my own family's company. "I didn't do this," I said, standing up, my voice shaking. "You know I'd never," but Father's expression didn't change. His disappointment was colder than any anger. "Enough, Ava. You've embarrassed this family for the last time. We trusted you." I looked around the table, searching for even one face that believed me. Not one. Ethan had orchestrated everything, the fake transfers, the signatures, even the whispers spreading through the company. I saw it now, clear as day, every coincidence, every stolen idea, every late-night call had been part of his plan. I was the scapegoat. Security entered moments later, as if they'd been waiting outside. The board members watched silently as they took my access card, my phone, even the company badge with my name on it. Ethan stood up, gently patting my father's shoulder. "We'll recover from this," he said solemnly. "I'll handle the damage." Handle the damage, or take my place. I wanted to scream, to expose him right there, but the words caught in my throat. Because I realized something terrifying. Ethan had covered his tracks too perfectly. If I accused him now, I'd sound desperate. Crazy. When they escorted me out, the staff whispered. Some looked away. Others smirked. The elevator doors closed, reflecting my own stunned face back at me, the face of a woman who'd just lost everything she'd built. By the time I reached the parking lot, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my car keys. My mind raced, anger, confusion, humiliation, all colliding at once. How could my own brother do this? How could my father believe him so easily? I sat there for hours, the betrayal sinking in like poison. Everything I'd sacrificed, gone. My career, my family, my reputation. And yet, beneath the heartbreak, something inside me snapped. Not in weakness, but in clarity. If they could destroy me this easily, then I had nothing left to lose. And that's when I decided, if Ethan Reynolds wanted to play dirty, I'd show him what happens when the quiet one fights back. 4 weeks after being thrown out of Reynolds Industries, I lived like a ghost. The city moved around me, cars honking, people laughing, life carrying on, but I was stuck in a loop of disbelief and pain. Every headline I saw burned deeper: Ethan Reynolds saves family empire after sister's scandal. They painted me as reckless, greedy, unstable. My father's silence confirmed the narrative. The name Ava Reynolds had become poison overnight. At first, I tried to fight the lies. I emailed the board, sent evidence, begged for a chance to explain. No one replied. I was invisible now, exactly as Ethan wanted. But pain has a strange way of reshaping people. The longer I sat in the wreckage, the clearer my mind became. The tears stopped. The fear faded. And what replaced them was something far more dangerous: resolve. The moment everything changed came one cold evening. I went to pick up my remaining belongings from the apartment I once shared with a close colleague, or so I thought. When I arrived, I heard voices inside. I froze. Through the slightly open door, I saw her, Claire, my former assistant, laughing on the phone. With Ethan. "Don't worry," she said, her tone light. "She hasn't figured it out. She still thinks it was a setup, not that you used her credentials directly. It's almost funny." My pulse roared in my ears. I backed away before she could see me, every word slicing into me like glass. So that was it. Ethan hadn't just betrayed me, he'd used the people closest to me to do it. The transfer files, the forged signature, the silence from the board, it was all orchestrated. And Claire had helped him. That night, something in me shifted. The old Ava, the trusting, loyal daughter, died quietly in that hallway. I went home, sat at my small desk, and opened my laptop. For the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. I planned. I started digging. Public records, corporate filings, shell companies, off-the-book contracts, every trace of Ethan's corruption. It wasn't hard to find cracks once I knew where to look. The man was smart, but arrogance leaves fingerprints. Days turned into weeks. I barely slept. My walls filled with notes, diagrams, and connections. Every piece of evidence I uncovered built the same picture: Ethan was slowly bleeding the company dry. And when the time was right, he planned to sell his shares and disappear with millions. He thought he'd won. But this time, I wouldn't go to my father. I wouldn't beg anyone to believe me. I'd make them see it. I'd take back what was mine: the company, the name, and the power they stripped from me. And when I was done, they'd wish they'd never disowned me. Planning revenge isn't glamorous. It's a slow, surgical thing: cold lists, careful conversations, and the steady, tedious assembling of proof until a single thread can unravel an empire. I learned to love the tedium. First, proof. I pulled every public filing, every whisper of an offshore LLC, and cross-referenced bank ledgers with contracts Ethan had signed. It took hours in dusty county offices and late nights hacking through corporate fog, but patterns emerged: shell companies with names that meant nothing, payments routed through 2 intermediary accounts, vendors that existed only on paper. I compiled it all into a dossier so heavy it made my hands shake. Then, allies. I couldn't do this alone, not against a man who'd bought loyalties and bought silence. Marco, the ex-CFO Ethan had fired for budget cuts, met me in a diner and handed me old backup drives. He wanted his job back, sure, but more than that, he wanted the truth told. Rosa, the plant manager who'd watched safety budgets get slashed, supplied internal memos showing how corners had been cut and where money had gone. Even Claire called me one night, voice small with guilt. she slid me audit logs she'd copied from Ethan's locked drawer. Betrayers can be useful when shame wakes them. We built traps. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind, small, undeniable things. A fake investor proposal was created and leaked through channels we knew Ethan would monitor. We seeded a phantom vendor into the chain and watched payments route the same way they always did. Every time Ethan touched a string, we recorded it. We created a timeline that tied a dozen irregularities to his personal accounts, then threaded in the forged authorizations he'd manufactured in my name. Next, exposure strategy. I split the dossier 3 ways, one copy to a reputable investigative journalist I trusted, someone with a history of taking down men like Ethan, one to a regulatory authority capable of freezing assets, and one to key board members who still might fear legal fallout more than family loyalty. Timing mattered. The regulator had to act before Ethan could sell or move funds. The journalist had to publish at the moment the board's hands were forced. Ethan continued to smile in public, to preside over interviews and charity galas as if nothing had changed. He was arrogant enough to believe his web was invisible. That arrogance became our advantage. On the night everything would start to move, I sat in my small apartment with a single lamp on and a cup of coffee gone cold. The dossier was assembled, encrypted drives tucked into a courier envelope, Marco on speed dial, Rosa standing by to come forward as a whistleblower, Claire ready to testify about the forged signatures she'd once helped plant. We synchronized watches and wrote a single, simple instruction: act only when I give the word. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I attached the last file, the ledger that directly connected Ethan's personal account to the shell company he'd used to siphon millions. My cursor trembled. I could feel the air in the room tighten. I hit send. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then my laptop pinged with 3 delivery confirmations. And then my phone buzzed. A text flashed on the screen from an unknown number: nice dossier. Shame it's coming from your IP. Somewhere, someone had been watching me. The morning the dossier went public, the city felt like it was holding its breath. The journalist's exposé dropped at 7:03 a.m., an online reckoning with my name in the headline and every damning document threaded through the story. Screenshots of the forged signatures, bank transfers mapped like a blood trail, emails tying Ethan to shell companies, it all spilled across feeds. Within an hour, regulators confirmed they were opening an emergency inquiry. By 9, the stock ticker that had glittered above Reynolds Tower started to bleed. Ethan's smile vanished as he watched his carefully curated life unravel on a dozen screens. He tried to pivot, to call a press conference with practiced charm, but the cameras pounced with questions about offshore accounts and forged authorizations. His rehearsed answers faltered. Reporters asked about the payment that had borne my name. Viewers watched the man who'd once been worshipped look smaller and smaller under the lights. At noon, black SUVs pulled up to Reynolds Tower. Men in suits moved like a storm through the marble lobby. Regulatory officers and federal agents executed seizure orders. IT teams took company servers offline while auditors escorted trembling execs into conference rooms. The board convened in crisis mode, and for the first time, the men who'd turned their backs on me showed panic where they once showed contempt. Across the street, shareholders demanded answers. The company's PR machine sputtered and failed, every statement seemed to sink them deeper. Investors who'd sung Ethan's praises for years were suddenly calling for emergency votes and interim management. Contracts were put on hold. The empire he'd been siphoning from began to creak. Then came the arrest. They found traces of transactions leading to a safe deposit box in a downtown bank, the same data I'd compiled months earlier. When agents walked into Ethan's private office, he tried to reach for his phone, for the carefully planted narratives, but there was no rescue this time. He was handcuffed in front of the mahogany desk where he'd once pretended to be king. Cameras captured the moment, his tailored suit wrinkled, his eyes wild and betrayed, the public finally seeing the rot beneath the polish. Father watched from the boardroom window as his son was led out. The proud man who had cut me off now looked hollow, the veneer of certainty stripped away. 1,000 unanswered questions hovered between us, but none of them belonged to him anymore. Claire testified quietly but truthfully before auditors. Marco's backup drives and Rose's memos became the evidence that toppled a throne. The board, ashamed and cornered, voted to suspend Ethan's authority and to place a special committee to restore governance, a committee that asked for one person's input above all others. I stood outside Reynolds Tower as the sun dipped low, the city's glass catching the last light. Reporters shouted my name, phones buzzed with messages. I felt the dossier weight in my bag, the proof that had become a weapon and a shield. Ethan Reynolds was finished, arrested, exposed, and stripped of the crown he'd stolen. The empire he'd tried to inherit through lies was bleeding, vulnerable, and for the first time, truly accountable. I watched him escorted into a police cruiser, his smirk gone, and let myself breathe. They had disowned me. I had returned, and the family business, ember by ember, was finally mine to claim. When the storm finally passed, the city was different, quieter, cautious, but watching. Ethan's downfall became headline history. Every network replayed the footage of him being led away in handcuffs, the once proud heir of Reynolds Industries reduced to a cautionary tale. Investigators uncovered the full scope of his crimes: embezzlement, forgery, insider trading, every dirty trick he'd built his empire on. He lost everything. The fortune he'd stolen was seized, his assets frozen, and his name blacklisted from every corporate circle he once dominated. My father, Charles Reynolds, resigned shortly after. The man who once accused me of shame finally admitted his greatest failure wasn't believing his daughter, it was believing his son. He tried to reach out. He wanted forgiveness, reconciliation, maybe even redemption. But I wasn't that naive girl anymore. I met him in the same boardroom where he had once disowned me. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply looked him in the eye and said, "You taught me how to fight for what's mine. I just learned to do it better." Under the board's recommendation and public pressure, Reynolds Industries was restructured. New leadership, new ethics oversight, new direction. They offered me an advisory role, a quiet acknowledgement that I was the one who had saved the company, not destroyed it. But I didn't take it. I had no desire to step back into a cage, no matter how gilded. Instead, I founded my own firm, AR Innovations, a consulting company that helped rebuild businesses ruined by greed and corruption. Within months, the same investors who once ignored me were knocking on my door. I became what Ethan always pretended to be, a visionary, a leader, and more importantly, a woman who built success on truth, not theft. Sometimes I still pass by the old Reynolds Tower. The company's new logo gleams where our family crest once hung. It doesn't sting anymore. Because I finally understand, legacy isn't about blood. It's about what survives after betrayal. One evening, I saw Ethan again, in a news clip, thinner, hollow-eyed, attending a hearing in a cheap suit. The reporter called him the disgraced former executive. For a second, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the day he forged my name, the day he laughed as they threw me out, and the pity vanished like smoke. Justice had already spoken. As I stood outside my office, watching the city lights flicker like 1,000 new beginnings, I whispered to myself, they disowned me to protect their power. Now, I am the power they can never take back. Clapperboard, tell me, viewers. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you? Did you ever get your justice, or are you still waiting for it? Share your story in the comments below. And if Ava's journey hit you deep, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because more stories of betrayal, strength, and sweet revenge are coming soon.